was just going to say probably the exact same thing you were. Thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to be engaging with other educators in our field of design all across the globe. So it's a great pleasure to be here, and we're really looking forward to collaborating. This entire roundtable has been designed to kind of give you a couple tidbits of what we're thinking about, and then we really want to hear from you. And so we're really looking forward to that collaboration.
Yeah, thank you so much to Alberto, Lise, and Melanie, because this is an amazing opportunity, and I think it started right from the opportunity that Alana and I got to work with each other, to feel with each other, and to sort of create some kind of provocations for the next 1 hour, and hope that all of you engage and share a lot of your perspectives and narratives with us.
Absolutely. So I think we're going to kind of kick this off. We're going to share our presentation and kick it off with a little bit about ourselves. So I'm going to do that now.
So while Alana is showing the screen, I just wanted to share that the first time both of us met, and we obviously didn't know each other, we actually started talking about how are we feeling at this moment. You know, all of us are feeling so overwhelmed with so many things that are happening and not happening. And one of the things, I mean, we found many things in common, but one thing that both of us felt very strongly is we are so tired of webinars. We have such levels of Zoom fatigue. We don't want yet another presentation. We don't want to hear more information or anything for that matter, you know. Can we just be? And I think it's in that spirit that we both thought that we really don't want to share anything in terms of a presentation, but the presentation that you see are more like provocations that we would want all of you to sort of think and respond to.
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking about these dualities that we're all experiencing, and we're experiencing them in so many different avenues of our lives, not just as educators or professionals. It's, you know, bleeding into our personal lives and our family lives, our students' lives. And so there's so many components that are happening. So with that kind of said, I'm going to lead into the next slide. And a way we wanted to introduce ourselves a little bit to you is to tell you about some of the shifts that we're shifting from and to. As you can see, I have my beloved San Diego City College background behind me. I thought it was very applicable and a good virtual background for this. And one of the shifts I have is a little bit, might feel a little bit different than the current situation. I actually transitioned online one semester before the pandemic. And so I had started putting in that preemptive work. And before that, I was teaching a night course. And so I had a unique demographic of students, and a lot of them, for the most part, were people transitioning, professionals transitioning out of their current careers into a different career. And I got used to that kind of pace and that type of student demographic. And that kind of continued in the online course the first semester, but then when the pandemic hit, it completely changed everything. And now I'm having to shift from this mostly professional demographic transitioning into a career in design to a wide variety of students. And so it's really it's caused me to rethink a lot of the components and how I instruct, how I provide feedback, and how I engage my students.
Yeah, and hi. So I'm Sudebi. I'm from India, based out of Bangalore, and I wear multiple hats. And this is something I love telling everyone about myself, that, you know, when I was a student, if you asked me what is my favorite subject, I always struggled because everything was connected to me. Most of the subjects were my favorite. In my own work life, I think I really struggled to respond if you ask me what exactly do you do and what exactly do you teach. And people have different terms for those, you know, from transdisciplinary practitioners to polymaths and whatnot. But I think I like calling myself a weaver and a traveler in a metaphorical way, because I think I interweave multiple elements, and I love to travel, you know, and both inside and outside. And I think one of the hats that I wear is that I have been a design educator at Srishti Institute of Art Design and Technology, which is one of the oldest design schools in India for the last 10 years. And I also have co-founded a design-led innovation collective called The Epicenter. Uh, and I mean, my interests and my practices are quite wide, but like Alana was talking about, I think shifts are like are always like that's a part of life. But I definitely would say that people are using the word pivot a lot of times, and both of us thought that, oh, that's another word we sometimes feel quite uncomfortable about. The shifts rather that have happened in our lives, and in my life, one was, of course, experience was a very, very important part of my life, in terms of what I experience and what I design as experiences for people. And when the physical experience cannot be changed, how do you still not like pretend that that's not happening, but how do you sort of make people forget that and sort of focus more on exchange? I had been working a lot on collaborations and co-creations, but I think in the last few months, my shift has been in co-sensing. As designers and design educators, I think a lot of focus had always been in thinking and making and doing. And I would say a major shift that has happened is towards being and feeling and unthinking, I would say. And with those kinds of shifts that I have personally experienced, I definitely feel like newer relationships have been fostered in my own life. It has opened up a lot of new windows, both physically and metaphorically. The window that we see, the screen, they have sort of opened up a lot of new avenues for me, and I'm sure many, many people like us, just to connect to different people, just to understand what really makes us human. Because as designers, we keep talking about context, we keep talking about empathy, we talk about people. What do these words really mean? I think so from making to sense making is something that I think I have been co-journeying with a lot of people like all of you and my students together. Because in the last 5 months, I mean, I have been home for the last 5 months, not really stepped out. And I have had these really life-changing experiences, and hope that all of you give in this roundtable as much as you receive, and let us see what kind of dualities do we have in our lives. And like I said, I love to travel, and both of us were thinking that we are shifting from something to something. And in this, the duality of the from and to, in the in between, is the journey that we make. And often we realize that there are fallacies and paradoxes of dualities in our lives, right? So not to sort of get stuck to the binaries, but understand the in-betweens. So before we get to the next part of it, I think we would like to ask any of you or many of you, what are the shifts that you are actually experiencing from and to? So would you like to share? Anyone can share here, you can talk, or you can write in the chat.
Put the question in the chat, so hopefully we're starting to generate a couple of answers. And please keep putting that in there. My example of one of the shifts I'm making is very directly related to my type of instruction, and Sudebi really outlined these components of being more empathetic and this human-centered approach to it. So there's so many of these dualities happening that none of it is off the table, because it all comes back to us as a community of design educators. So please keep putting your shifts in the chat. Give as much as you receive. I'm looking at some of them. Design is dynamic and not static. What really makes us human. So some really nice key points and keywords that are coming out of the chat right now. I'm gonna move on. If you're, Sudebi, you ready to move on?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So we're moving into our topic, exploring dualities, design educators transition to learning designers. And there's a little snippet below that gives you a little bit more meaty insight into that. But essentially, as educators, we often discuss that we're always learning, right? That's what we tell our students. We are always learning. But as educators, are we actually being actionable in those pursuits? How often do we change or update or add to our lectures, right? Especially in this format now where we're having to create these online lectures, whether you're pre-recording them or not, as a community, how often are we actually rising to the challenge of all this change that is happening. We have seen that response time is incredibly important and impactful. So are we being responsive? Now is truly the time to show the power of design. We talk about the power of design and the power of problem solving, and we are problem solvers as design educators, as design professionals. And I'm sure we are often paralyzed in situations of, I just don't know where to start. And there was a wonderful kind of segue into, I was looking in the Roundtable Slack this morning, and I'm not sure if he's attending, I hope he is, but someone named Phil Mendez made a really great point along that of, do we need to start small? And that's exactly where I was leading into. So why aren't we breaking this down in a way, like, why aren't we tackling this as if that we are a company, the Design Educators Organization, and we are that company and that client? So why aren't we breaking it down the way that we know how to? We're professionals solving problems, but when it becomes personal, we feel that paralyzing kind of mentality. You know, it's the same reason we all at one point or another have been, you know, working on our own personal websites for X amount of years. It just never seems to happen because it's personal. And that brings us back to how we can be more reactive to our students, right? Because it's personal to them. But when we separate ourselves with those dualities between educating and learning, those dualities start to become even more present. And this pandemic has really put a big face to that.
Absolutely. And I think like just to connect to that, there are a couple of things. One is that the kind of challenges students are facing, those are the kind of challenges educators are facing as well, right? And I often see that with, with many things, people are dwelling in between trying to be hyper productive because you want to make use of the time and everything, and then not feeling very productive with our own vulnerabilities and everything, right? And you almost feel like teaching is some kind of a performance where you have to always be perfect, always be like doing something, and it creates a kind of these different boxes and hierarchies and divide. So I mean, if we rather, like, again, that's why we were talking about empathy, can we have more empathy towards ourselves? Can we try and understand us with our own context and the changing context within home and outside? And I feel like if we sort of reflect upon some of those personal experiences and those narratives of those experiences, we probably can connect to the students better, because it's not the us versus them, but it's more like, can we make sense of this whole thing together? And the other thing is that we often see that design educators who are also practicing designers of some sort, they might also be having research and many other hats that they wear. But the point is that you consider yourself as a creative practitioner, but when you go to teach, sometimes we feel like we are giving out content, but learning is also something that you design. So can we wear our designer hat and actually look at learning and the changes which are happening in the context, in the people, in the constraints and everything, and design possibilities over there, and maybe co-design possibilities with our students? So that's something that we thought we should be thinking about.
Absolutely. That was eloquently said, Sudebi. And that kind of leads into as design educators, putting on that hat as designers, how do we tackle this rebrand almost and simplify, using that, that fundamental principle in design of simplification down to basic questions, and make this task ahead of us more digestible. So that's going to really lead us into our first question. And these are going to be the breakout rooms. So everybody is going to be broken into these breakout rooms and have a question that, to kind of dig into. And the first one is, what fundamentals create and connect a community? Not even necessarily a design community, just a community in general. It's sometimes easy to initiate a community, but it's difficult to retain or sustain it unless you find the glue that keeps it all together. So what is that glue? What are those fundamentals? What are those, in the general concept of community, not just design educators, but the baselines and building blocks of community and connection and creation?
The second question that we have for another breakout room is what motivates you to become or join a community? And it's really important to also sort of differentiate between the two, because when we think about joining a community, there are certain drivers that make us join. And you know, certain things that become hindrances that do not let us join, you know, our own assumptions, our own biases, our own prejudice, and many other things, right? But at the same time, sometimes we join a community because we feel we belong there, or this is where, you know, I want to be, or I should be. And then you sort of fail to kind of continue that with that association. So what helps in that becoming, that you do not look at, oh, this is a community and I am a part of it in terms of joining, but I have become the community myself. And so just to sort of look at what is it that motivates you to become or join a community.
Our third question, and we're starting to get a little bit more down into specifics, is does the current design education community have invisible hierarchies that divide instead of connect? Do contract and adjunct faculty have a different separation? Is there school loyalty? What about an educator that perhaps teaches at different schools? Are we able to relate unless our specific credentials are the same? Do we have to be exactly the same to understand each other? Do students have these same hierarchies? And do we as educators kind of put them in those hierarchies before they've even really, you know, dug their teeth into design or dug their teeth into the course? You know, the elective student, the design forward student, the career transitional designer. What are these invisible hierarchies that are pulling in these different dualities that are dividing us instead of connecting us?
So I'm connecting to the last question that we have, and in some way this is also connected. You know, why have design educators stopped being learners? And some of the things that we can mull over if we want to continue exploring this question is the different kinds of divisions that happen sometimes. Is one is, of course, like in fact some of the examples that Alana quoted, those can happen. It can also happen that, you know, there might be some people or designers who might be considered more as a maker versus some people more as a thinker, you know, and are there really those kinds of divisions? And the other thing is that who is really a designer? I think that's a question that we can actually think about, because on one end there is a lot of dialogue and discourses around democratizing design, but what does that mean? Because from on one end you have people who might be calling themselves designers because they are trained in design with a formal course. There might be people who might not have any so-called formal training, but they have the experience and the practice for many years. And within this practice you have intergenerational practitioners and practitioners who are morphing from one discipline to another. So is it disciplinary, is it transdisciplinary, is it interdisciplinary, is it multidisciplinary? What is it, and how are we sort of trying to make sense of it? So I think that's a very, very good question to question, you know, ourselves about, because the moment we stop being learners, we start believing in the little boxes that we are in, right? And we start looking at the world in a very fragmented way. But if we look at it in a very complex systemic way, if we look at it in a more inclusive way, we will always be learner, because I might be more of a maker and I might want to bring in more critical making into my work, and I might be more of a thinker and I might start doing more, you know, or practicing more. And the other end can also be that as design educators, are we some of us, possible is that while we are teaching, have we stopped learning about our own? Because it happens in, I think, all kinds of teaching where we end up talking about things which we learned while we studied, and you know, not in a futuristic way. And that's actually one of the shifts that have happened within me. I used to think that I'm a futurist. I have started calling myself, I'm not somewhere else. I think I'm a presentist right now, because the future is right here. So I think some of those questions we can mull over. Yes. So the next question is,
a perfect transition into what you were just talking about, Sudebi. What dualities are we experiencing as educators and as learners? we're trying to guide this new generation of emerging designers, while also trying to find our own solutions now, for things that we might not individually understand. So how can a community collective come together to tackle these different dualities as educators and learners if we're only internalizing ourselves? It's a very common characteristic. I'm certainly someone that's very internal, always in my head. And that's, I think this profession just lends itself to that, because research is a big meaty part of what we do before we even start doing anything with our hands. So you almost have to designers start as these thinkers. So what are these dualities that are crossing over between that education and learning now? And how do we solve that together? How do we talk about that together if we're just always inside ourselves, inside our own heads? Do we need to balance instruction and the pace of instruction for these different emerging designers that are coming into our courses and our, well, right now virtual classrooms, but classrooms nonetheless? And do we just need to kind of take a step back and learn more from our students, but will we struggle to keep our position in the classroom if we're doing that? And these are just some of the dualities that we're starting to experience with this transition of education and learning within ourselves. But what are more of those? And that's kind of the question that this breakout room is really going to dig their teeth into.
Can educators use their human experiences and insights to shift and transform, and not join or build or pivot or change design education using design principles and nonlinear creativity? And this is really something where, again, we are asking all of you to ponder over your own experiences, which might be quite different from what others are talking about, because I mean, what is the world telling us? We're all creative practitioners, right? So do we sort of listen to what others are saying? Like things like, oh, now everything has become online. And then sort of getting into this whole whirlwind around what is online, remote, synchronous, asynchronous. One is those kinds of things. But if it brings us to the main question as to what is the purpose of what we are trying to do, then probably we'll stop looking at simplistic answers or solutions to complex problems, right? Not either say technology is the solution or technology is not the solution I want. So thinking about our own human experiences and the insights, and then to say where can we bring in the shifts, where can we have transformation, because those transformation, if we can mull over, can actually be reflected in the pedagogy that we actually sort of bring into our classroom. So we really become designers of pedagogy or andragogy, whatever we might want to say, but not to say that this is the new normal, because then again, it's an assumption that the old was actually normal and the new isn't. So can we sort of bring in all of these things and then bring in our own creativity, understanding of what design is and what design could be and where design can morph into, and bring in those principles even in teaching and learning?
Absolutely. So these are our 6 questions that we're posing for everyone in this roundtable to start dissecting, digging into. There is no wrong answer. I'm sure you all know that, but there is absolutely no wrong answer. We're looking for all that collaboration and feedback. And we're hoping that somebody within the first 30 seconds, once you get into your breakout rooms, can kind of, raise their hand and take notes. So when everyone comes back, you can tell us some of those highlights and overviews and objectives that you discussed.
Yeah, and if I may just give you a little bit of a teaser into why we are saying that, is that both of us plan to take this work forward, and we want to create a mission statement for the designers post-COVID, and all the insights and inputs and perspectives that you're going to share, we want to continue this conversation. So it's not really going to end in 20 minutes or 30 minutes. We'll leave it for some time, share our email IDs, and of course we have the Slack channel. And definitely we want to put it all together to co-create the mission statement. So it's not really that you're sharing and it's been forgotten. We want to have this as a real co-creative experience with all of you.
Yeah, absolutely. So Pete, please check the chat. Melanie put the Google Doc in there that has a rundown of all of the questions, and you'll be assigned question 1 through 6 for your participation. And we really are looking forward to hearing back from you guys. Welcome back, everybody. I hope the breakout rooms. I know we were assigning things in the beginning there, but I hope some really great conversations started. And we would really. I'm going to share my screen again in just a moment. But Sudebi and I would really love to just. This is our time of listening and what you discussed in those. So if there's one person from each breakout room that can either get unmuted or maybe put it in the chat if it's not possible to unmute you. Just discuss some highlights and overviews. If everyone wants to, I don't know how, if it's best to just say, hey, my name in the chat and I'll be the person talking about this, and Alberto can unmute.
Everybody can talk. So just everybody has the ability, so everybody can talk to you. Just unmute themselves.
Okay, great. So I'm going to share my screen and it just goes over all 6 of those questions just as a general overview. And we're just going to dive in with breakout room number 1 that had that first question. So I'm going to do that now. All right, so who would like to talk about the fundamentals that create and connect a community?
Well, I wasn't in that. Oops, sorry, go on.
No, I'm saying that it's interesting that that the first question doesn't have too much written in the Google Doc, whereas the other ones have. So we would absolutely love to hear from some people.
Yeah, even if this wasn't your breakout room and you have some contributions to it, it could be maybe you find that it's a really simple question and there are 3 or 4 touch points that really create and connect a community. So we can just dive into it in that way as well. If you just have thoughts on that question, maybe you wish you got that question in your breakout room.
You know, it's interesting. I think I can talk about it by compare and contrast. So last court, you know, in the spring, some professors opted not to do any Zoom and just do 100% online. And others chose to be synchronous and or a hybrid. And I really used my class time and my Zoom time as an opportunity, like what we're doing right now, talking. And so they did everything online. You know, the lectures were online. And then they would bring their homework together and the students, and I would pose different kind of community oriented questions, kind of more the questions you would ask each other in the hallway. And we ended up feeling really connected at the end of I'm on quarters, but I'm even getting goosebumps because we were really connected with my students at the end of the quarter. And I think it's because we stayed in breakout rooms on Zoom, had questions that weren't just related to school, that we were able to connect. And so I think there are ways to do it in this environment.
That's great. So a similarity of goal could be a way that connects and creates community. You know, it doesn't even have to necessarily be specifically design or specifically educators, just a community in general. How does that get formed? And maybe, you know, the simple basis of that is it's connected through a like-minded goal or want or need.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I would like to add to you know, Karen's answer. She mentioned everyone, you know, coming together and, you know, bringing their homework together, talking about it. In our group, we talked about sharing helps build a sense of community, and I really think it does. We go there to have this give and take of like learning, and then if I share this, you're gonna learn something, and if you share something, I'm gonna learn something. So I think that really does help create and connect the community.
Thank you. That's a beautiful point and a great kind of addition to what Karen was saying. Just that likeness, and sometimes it starts with that one person for other people to say, oh, that's how I've been feeling too. So we're going to move on to the second question because we want to make sure to get at least touch on each one. So breakout room number 2, what motivates you to become or join a community? And we've kind of just touched on that because these questions segment into each other really naturally, but are there any other additional highlights or thoughts that came out of that breakout room? It's some really nice conversation happening in the chat.
Yeah.
Lots of compliments to Destiny's background, which is fantastic. But also when Megan D shared that that we're all helping to create and connect the design educators community by being here. And that's absolutely true. So why are we all here? What motivated us to be here? A want, a need. And so, right, that's just bridging into it really beautifully. We can move on to the third question.
Can I just add something real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think oftentimes what makes me want to join a community is not always what it can be differentiated from what makes you want to stay in a community. I think things like integrity of its members, transparency, honesty, trust, that's why you stay with community. You know, which can be very different from why do you want to, you know, what draws you to community. So they're kind of two different things.
Yes, absolutely.
That was beautiful. I was going to say, I think what motivates me, like I'm always surprised when I join into a community, all the commonalities I have with that community. Like I tend to like this community even better than AIGA as a whole, because I think that you all as educators really understand what I'm going through. And so I think that motivates me to join a community.
That sense of camaraderie is really powerful.
Well, it's interesting to realize that you're actually already part of a community.
Yeah.
And I was discussing with the people in my group that I'm not able to go to conferences and you know, so the fact that this is happening has been an absolute revelation for me, because I've, for the last 3 days, have felt like I'm not alone. I'm not alone in thinking about this. I'm not alone in trying to work this out. I'm not alone in trying to solve these problems. And it's been tremendously encouraging.
Oh, that's so great to hear. Just the accessibility, if I were to just put it into one word, and to hear you talk about that, and to know that this is just as rewarding for everybody else. You know, I've been dropping into other roundtables as well, and it's great to hear that accessibility is a component of community. I want to make sure we kind of touch on each discussion question. So we're going to go into 3. Does the current design education community have invisible hierarchies that divide instead of connect? Breakout room number 3, or anybody else that has any highlights or points that they feel about this question. If you disagree, you can absolutely say that as well. Maybe there are no invisible hierarchies.
I was the note taker, so I can just go over what we discussed in that breakout room. So we sort of jumped off the idea of how we are sort of divided as educators into our own communities, of often as like tenure, part-time, contract, and started thinking about, especially in this COVID-19 era, we're not, you know, many people who are not in the tenured position, especially adjuncts or contract professors, are, you know, not sure if their contracts are going to be renewed. So there's this like really kind of big instability there. And then we talked about, one of our breakout room members mentioned, there's all this talk right now about diversity and equity, but absolutely no discussion of ageism for older professors who are being kind of pushed out right now for both health reasons and just because. And, you know, things like have been happening, like sabbaticals have been modified because of, you know, this, like in relation to this, and, you know, lots of things have been happening to push people to retire. So that was kind of a big jump thing for us to kind of think about for a moment and spend some time with. We also talked about just how you know, I think that segued into like how different teaching positions or different types of teachers are required to, even just like if you're at a school that's online completely or going back in hybrid, like we're all, you know, have different levels of exposure we're putting ourselves at risk to, which is, I think, causing a lot of anxiety for people. Yeah, so that's kind of what we talked about.
Actually, that's really interesting, you know, because the thing is that I mean, this is a conversation I've had with some other people, not necessarily just about design education, and the point is that sometimes we have an assumption or a misconception that we only come together through our common interests or something that sort of bind us together. Sometimes our own discomfort, our own vulnerabilities also bring us together. You feel included because you realize that you're included in the discomfort. And I think in some way, COVID-19 is a situation like that. And I think that was also one of the premise of having these conversations, that it's really sort of unkind to assume that nothing has changed for an educator who's suddenly made their home into a classroom, their studios, their everything. And what are you facing as a human being with all your challenges? And then you also have to sort of feel that, okay, there are learners, and how do you sort of create learning for them, right? And I think this is something I personally feel that until and unless we all start co-journeying together, the students and the educators, we will not be able to create, like, you know, take away the divide. Because I think we need to co-travel together. When our outside travel has been curbed and it has ended, we can actually start doing our real journey. So that's what I personally feel.
That's lovely.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you to Renee and Sudebi for both touching on those points, and really great conversation that happened in that breakout room. We're going to move on just because we're running low on time. I'm going to combine questions 4 and 5 since they really naturally transition to each other. So why have design educators stop being learners, and what are those dualities that we're experiencing as we're starting to have to be educators and learners at the same time?
I feel personally that as we've discussed in my breakout room, our answer was, well, question was number 5, that as designers, when we go into the field of design, we naturally consent to always being a learner and an educator, because we have to learn to adapt all the time. One of my answers was, as an educator, how do we motivate students who aren't motivated? So during this time, it may even be harder to motivate students who are naturally not motivated because they're on the computer, we're not face to face. So it gets even harder. We have to figure out solutions for that.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and that kind of ties into us being learners in this new environment, and how do we make those transitions to this demand that students are having of us as educators. I hate to cut it off, but we're going to move into question number 6 really briefly before time runs out. Can educators use their own human experiences and insights to shift and transform using design principles and nonlinear creativity? This is a meaty question, I know. I see a big yes in the chat, and the answer is just totally yes. It could just be as simple as that. It's just a hard yes. Yes, we can absolutely do that. And so maybe the transition to that question is how,
well,
and how do we start tackling that? And that's why we sort of formed our whole presentation, looking at it to try and remove ourselves a little bit from the personal, since we're all educators, and tackle it a little more from the outside, just to give that scope. If there's not any final comments, we're gonna move on towards the end of the slide, because we want to make sure to give.
Yeah, we had some
follow up with
question.
everyone.
There was some question as to the nature of the question itself. I was kind of debating with the other people in the group, what exactly do you mean by design principles, in what context? Can you hear me? No?
Yes,
Yeah.
I can hear you, Howard. I was sorry. I wasn't sure if you were finished.
And so we sort of went off on that, and then at the very end, I reread the question and go, wait a second, my own experience is something I could actually just put on the website. So I've been developing material for students off the grid, outside of the grid. So these are you know, separate learning tools that are not part of the regular, the regular program that we're here in this room for, or this virtual room for. So and sort of nonlinear creativity, I didn't know what that meant, but nonlinear forms of learning is something I think that's how I kind of reinterpreted that part of the question. So I don't know if I followed what was expected or not, but it was an interesting question and interesting discussion we had trying to figure it out.
Well, good. Like I said, it's kind of more meaty, and so you're almost dissecting this question because it's the biggest one in the whole group, which is why it's the last one of. And some of these, you know, I saw in the chat, someone, you know, disagreed with this question or that question, and that's part of the discussion too. So all of your points are great, Howard, and it's great to hear also that part of your own human experiences is to leave your designated curriculum at, you know, essentially, and go off that grid and start providing other types of resources.
Right.
Something, yeah. So I want to talk about still number 4. Why have design educators stopped being learners? Here I disagree with the question because it's accusational question.
Yeah.
Because some educators, first of all, continue and will go there till death to be learners. And this shows a disrespect to educators as opposed to practitioners who go with the time changes, with the technology that is in high speed. But it is an old profession that has to be respected and equally as the technological advances happened, and fast learners and practitioners don't have to be opposite to the teachers. That's my statement.
Absolutely, Olga, and completely agree with you about, or not necessarily agree, but understand where you're coming from. And we knew, Sudebi and I knew this question posed a little bit of accusational type of hierarchy, but that was part of the intent there a little bit, is are we stopping being learners or are we not?